Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be exploring these instructions that feel surprisingly relevant to our modern lives. It's from the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 12 through 16.
Okay.
These are some of Moses' final words to the Israelites before they enter the Promised Land.
Right.
And it's like he's giving them this blueprint for how to build a society that's both faithful and just.
What's fascinating here is that he's not just talking about rituals or religious practices.
Right.
He's laying out a vision for a way of life, a way of being in the world that's rooted in a deep commitment to certain values.
Okay, so let's dive into this blueprint. Right away in chapter 12, Moses commands the Israelites to destroy all remnants of false worship in the land they are conquering.
Yeah.
And he's not messing around. He's not talking about just like a symbolic gesture.
Mm.
He's talking about like every altar, every idol,
Everything
dedicated to other gods, just completely gone.
Yeah.
Why such a radical act?
It's about making a clean break from the past, but it's more than just that. I think it gets to the very core of what it means to truly commit to something.
Okay.
It's like saying, I'm not hedging my bets here. I'm all in.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that this idea of rejecting false idols isn't just an ancient concept. It's something we grapple with constantly in our own lives.
Totally. What are the things that we're tempted to put before our values today?
Yeah.
Is it about money, status, the need to be liked?
Yeah, all that.
It feels like those things can take on a kind of idol-like hold on us if we're not careful.
Absolutely. Think about the way consumerism works. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us that happiness comes from buying more stuff, having the latest gadgets looking a certain way.
Right.
It creates this insatiable desire for things that ultimately can't fulfill us.
It's almost like we're being programmed to worship these external things instead of focusing on what truly matters.
Exactly. And the danger is that when we elevate these things to the status of idols, we end up making choices that are out of alignment with our deeper values.
So how do we even recognize when something has become an idol in our lives? Are there warning signs we can look out for?
I think one key indicator is that feeling of never having enough.
Oh, interesting.
If you're constantly striving for more, whether it's money, possessions, or approval, and you never feel satisfied, that's a sign that you might be chasing after a false idol.
So it's about paying attention to that internal compass.
Yeah.
That sense of whether our actions are aligned with what we truly value.
Exactly.
Which leads us perfectly to the next challenge Moses lays out.
Okay.
Chapter 13, where he warns about false prophets. And this isn't just about religious figures.
Right.
He's talking about anyone who might try to deceive or manipulate the Israelites, leading them away from their core beliefs.
And what's fascinating is that he frames this as a test.
Okay.
God is allowing these false prophets to appear as a way of proving the Israelites' loyalty and commitment. It's like a spiritual trial by fire.
That's intense.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, you're going to be bombarded with persuasive voices. You're going to encounter people who try to lead you astray. But this is an opportunity to strengthen your discernment, to hone your ability to distinguish truth from falsehood.
Exactly. And I think this is more relevant than ever in our world today. We're flooded with information from all sides.
Right.
And it can be incredibly difficult to know what to trust.
Totally.
Think about the rise of misinformation, propaganda, deepfakes. It's a minefield out there.
It's like we all need to become expert truth detectives.
Right. And that means developing critical thinking skills, questioning our assumptions, and learning how to evaluate sources of information.
Right.
We can't just passively absorb whatever is thrown at us.
So how do we become better at this? What are some practical steps we can take to sharpen our discernment?
Well, first, I think it's crucial to diversify your information sources.
Okay.
Don't just rely on one news outlet or social media feed. Expose yourself to a variety of perspectives, even ones you might not agree with.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about getting a more well-rounded view of the issue.
Exactly. And then ask yourself some critical questions.
Like what?
Who is sharing this information?
Yeah.
What are their motivations? What evidence are they presenting?
Right.
Are there any red flags that might suggest bias or manipulation?
So it's about being an active participant in the process of information consumption, not just a passive recipient.
Precisely. And I think it's also crucial to cultivate a healthy skepticism.
Okay.
Don't just blindly believe everything you read or hear.
Right.
Even if it comes from a source you generally trust. Be willing to question, to dig deeper, to consider alternative viewpoints.
It's almost like we need to adopt a kind of trust but verify approach to information in the digital age.
That's a great way to put it. And I think this links directly to the idea of being a set-apart people,
Okay.
which Moses addresses in chapter 14.
Yeah.
It's about maintaining a unique identity and resisting the pressure to conform to the dominant culture, even when it's difficult.
And this is where things start to get a little trickier,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because for the Israelites, this involves specific rules
Right?
about things like dietary choices and mourning practices.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we translate that concept of being set apart to our modern lives?
I think the key is to understand the underlying principle.
Yes.
It's not about adhering to a rigid set of external rules. It's about consciously choosing to live in alignment with your values,
Okay.
even when they're not the popular or dominant ones in your culture.
So it's less about what you eat or how you grieve and more about the internal compass guiding your choices.
Exactly. It's about asking yourself,
Yeah.
what do I believe in? What do I stand for?
Right.
And am I willing to make choices that reflect those values,
Yeah.
even if it means going against the grain?
It's about having the courage of your convictions, even in the face of social pressure or criticism,
Yeah.
which, let's be honest, can be really hard.
It can be incredibly challenging, but I think it's also incredibly empowering.
How so?
Because when you choose to live in alignment with your values,
Right.
you're no longer just drifting along with the current. You're taking control of your life and shaping it in a way that reflects who you truly are.
It's about owning your choices and being intentional about the kind of person you want to be in the world.
And I think this idea of intentional living is really at the heart of what Moses is getting at in these chapters. He's calling the Israelites to be thoughtful, deliberate,
Right.
and purposeful in the way they live their lives.
And that intentionality isn't just about personal piety, is it? It spills over into how they're supposed to treat others,
Yeah.
especially those who are vulnerable or marginalized.
That's right. In chapter 15, Moses lays out some pretty radical laws about debt release and the treatment of servants.
Okay.
And these laws were not just about being nice. They were about challenging the prevailing economic systems
Right.
that often trapped people in cycles of debt and servitude.
It's like he's saying, because you yourselves were once oppressed, you have a responsibility to be liberators.
Exactly. These laws were a direct challenge to the status quo. They were about creating a more just and equitable society, one where everyone had the opportunity to flourish.
And that's a powerful concept that resonates even today, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, how can we apply those same principles of justice and compassion to the systems and structures in our own world?
That's a huge question and one we'll definitely dig into further. But just to plant a seed, I think it starts with recognizing that our choices have consequences.
Okay.
Not just for ourselves, but for others as well.
It's about being aware of how our actions, especially in areas like finances and consumption, can either contribute to systems of oppression or help to dismantle them.
Exactly. It's about aligning our choices with our values, not just in our personal lives, but also in our engagement with the wider world.
So what are some concrete ways we can do that? Like,
Yeah.
how do we even begin to think about what it means to live out these principles of economic justice in a complex, globalized world?
That's where we'll pick up after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
So we're talking about economic justice, which feels like a massive, complex topic.
Right.
Where do we even begin to unpack this?
It can feel overwhelming for sure. But I think Moses gives us a starting point in Deuteronomy 15. Remember those laws about debt release and the treatment of servants?
Yeah, he was basically telling the Israelites to create a system where people wouldn't be perpetually trapped in debt or servitude.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because these laws were a direct challenge to the prevailing economic systems of the ancient world. They were radical, even revolutionary for their time.
Okay, but how do we bridge that gap to today? Those specific laws might not directly translate, but what are the underlying principles at play here?
I think it boils down to this. How do we create a system where everyone has a fair shot, where people aren't exploited or left behind simply because of their circumstances?
Right, because the systems we have now, well, they don't exactly feel designed for fairness, do they?
They don't. We've got income inequality, wealth disparities, systems that often favor those who are already privileged. It's a lot to grapple with.
So are we talking about completely overhauling the entire economic system?
I don't think it's necessarily about throwing everything out and starting from scratch, but it does require a shift in mindset, a willingness to question the status quo and consider alternatives.
Okay, so less about revolution, more about evolution. What would that even look like?
Well, for one thing, it might involve supporting businesses and organizations that prioritize ethical practices and fair treatment of workers.
Like being mindful of where we spend our money, making sure it aligns with our values?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about using our consumer power to create positive change. It might also involve advocating for policies that promote economic justice, like living wages, affordable housing, and access to quality education and healthcare.
So it's about taking action both on a personal level and a societal level.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that the choices we make have ripple effects.
It all comes back to that idea of intentionality we were talking about earlier, doesn't it?
Right.
Being mindful of our choices and how they impact others.
And that mindfulness extends beyond just our economic choices. It permeates every aspect of the blueprint Moses is laying out. Remember chapter 16, where he emphasizes the importance of remembering and celebrating.
Yeah, he's talking about observing religious festivals as reminders of God's faithfulness and their shared history as a people.
And what's interesting is that he doesn't just present these festivals as empty rituals. He sees them as vital for shaping a collective identity, for strengthening the community's bond with both God and each other.
It's like these festivals are creating a shared narrative, a sense of belonging that transcends individual experience.
Exactly. They're a way of connecting to something larger than themselves, something that gives meaning and purpose to their lives.
Okay, so how do we translate that to today? Like, what are the modern-day equivalents of these festivals? We might not all share the same religious beliefs, but is there something universal about this need to connect to something bigger than ourselves?
Absolutely. Think about the rituals and traditions that bring people together in your own life. It could be family gatherings, cultural celebrations, community events, even just sharing a meal with friends and telling stories.
It's about those moments that remind us we're part of something larger, something that connects us to each other and to our shared humanity.
And those moments are so important, especially in a world that often feels fragmented and isolating.
Okay, so we've got economic justice, we've got a sense of shared identity and belonging. What's the next piece of the puzzle in Moses's blueprint?
Well, right alongside those elements, he places a strong emphasis on justice and integrity. It's woven throughout the text, but it's explicitly addressed at the end of chapter 16. He commands the appointment of judges and officers who will uphold justice without bias or corruption.
It's like he's saying, okay, you've got this foundation of shared values and a commitment to caring for each other, but now you need a system that protects those values and ensures fairness for everyone.
Exactly. And what's striking is how aware he is of the potential pitfalls, especially the corrosive influence of power. He warns that a gift can blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous, which is a pretty stark warning about the dangers of corruption.
Whoa, yeah. That feels incredibly relevant to what we see happening in the world today, doesn't it? Like the way power can be used to manipulate, exploit, and silence those who are trying to speak truth to it.
It's a timeless warning, and it's not just about those in official positions of power. It's about all of us recognizing that we all have the potential to be corrupted by power, whether it's in our personal relationships, our workplaces, or our communities.
So how do we guard against that? What are some ways we can promote justice and integrity, not just in the systems around us, but also within ourselves?
It starts with being honest with ourselves about our own biases and blind spots. It means being willing to challenge our own assumptions and to listen to perspectives that differ from our own.
So it's about cultivating a sense of humility and being open to learning and growing.
Exactly. It's also about holding ourselves and others accountable for our actions. That means speaking up against injustice even when it's uncomfortable. It means refusing to participate in systems or behaviors that perpetuate inequality.
It's about having the courage to stand up for what we believe is right, even when it's difficult.
And it's about recognizing that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, not a destination. There will always be work to be done, always room for improvement.
It's a lifelong journey of learning, unlearning, and relearning how to be better, both individually and collectively.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? It's a challenge, but it's also an invitation to grow and evolve.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about rejecting false idols, developing discernment, living intentionally embracing economic justice, fostering a sense of belonging, and upholding justice and integrity. Feels like a pretty comprehensive blueprint for a just and fulfilling life, even thousands of years later.
It is. And what's remarkable is how interconnected all of these elements are. They're not separate compartments. They're woven together into a tapestry of values and practices that reinforce each other.
It's like a holistic vision of what it means to live a good life, both individually and as part of a community.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most powerful takeaways from our deep dive into Deuteronomy chapters 12 through 16. It's a reminder that even ancient texts can offer profound insights into the challenges we face today.
Okay, so as we wrap up our exploration of these chapters, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
That's a great question. I think for me, the most important message is that we have agency. We have the power to shape our lives and the world around us in ways that reflect our values. We're not just passive recipients of whatever fate throws our way. We can choose to live intentionally to make choices that align with our deepest beliefs about what is good and just and true.
It's like Moses is saying, don't underestimate the power of your choices. Even small acts of kindness, courage, and integrity can have a ripple effect, creating positive change that extends far beyond ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're not just isolated individuals. We're part of a web of relationships and systems, and our actions have the power to influence those around us.
So it's not just about cultivating personal virtue. It's about contributing to a larger vision of a just and compassionate world.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes these teachings from Deuteronomy so compelling. They offer not just moral guidelines, but a framework for building a better society.
It's like he's giving us a blueprint for a world that's radically different from the one we often see around us.
Yes. A world where the pursuit of wealth and power is tempered by a deep commitment to justice and compassion, where truth is valued above deception, and where individual and collective identities are rooted in something deeper and more enduring than fleeting trends or ideologies.
It's a powerful vision, and it makes me wonder how we can take these principles and translate them into concrete actions in our own lives.
That's the challenge, isn't it? To move beyond simply admiring these ideas and start embodying them in our daily lives.
So how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
I think it starts with asking ourselves some honest questions. What are the false idols in my own life? What are the things I'm tempted to put before my values? Am I being intentional about the way I consume information, the choices I make, the way I treat others? Am I using my resources and influence to promote justice and compassion in the world?
It's like taking a personal inventory, checking in with ourselves to see if our actions are aligned with our aspirations.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing process. We're all works in progress, constantly learning and growing.
And that's okay. It's about the journey, not necessarily arriving at some perfect destination.
Right. The important thing is that we're moving in the right direction, that we're striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
So as you go about your day, dear listener, we invite you to consider how you might embody these principles in your own life and how you might contribute to building a world that reflects the vision of justice and righteousness that we've explored today.
Remember, even small acts of kindness, courage, and integrity can have a ripple effect, creating positive change that extends far beyond ourselves.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Deuteronomy. Until next time, keep seeking truth, practicing compassion, and striving for justice in all that you do. It's like Moses is saying, don't underestimate the power of your choices. Even small acts of kindness, courage, and integrity can have a ripple effect, creating positive change that extends far beyond ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're not just isolated individuals. We're part of a web of relationships and systems, and our actions have the power to influence those around us.
So it's not just about cultivating personal virtue. It's about contributing to a larger vision of a just and compassionate world.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes these teachings from Deuteronomy so compelling. They offer not just moral guidelines, but a framework for building a better society.
It's like he's giving us a blueprint for a world that's radically different from the one we often see around us.
Yes, a world where the pursuit of wealth and power is tempered by a deep commitment to justice and compassion, where truth is valued above deception, and where individual and collective identities are rooted in something deeper and more enduring than fleeting trends or ideologies.
It's a powerful vision, and it makes me wonder how we can take these principles and translate them into concrete actions in our own lives.
That's the challenge, isn't it? To move beyond simply admiring these ideas and start embodying them in our daily lives.
So how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
I think it starts with asking ourselves some honest questions. What are the false idols in my own life? What are the things I'm tempted to put before my values? Am I being intentional about the way I consume information, the choices I make, the way I treat others? Am I using my resources and influence to promote justice and compassion in the world?
It's like taking a personal inventory, checking in with ourselves to see if our actions are aligned with our aspirations.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing process. We're all works in progress, constantly learning and growing.
And that's okay. It's about the journey, not necessarily arriving at some perfect destination.
Right. The important thing is that we're moving in the right direction, that we're striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Deuteronomy, what are some final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the key takeaway here is that these ancient teachings offer us a timeless blueprint for living a life of meaning.